Okay, let's just dive straight into this explainer. I want you to picture the year 2072. We are dropping right into a strange, deeply scuffed laboratory hidden somewhere in a sprawling, futuristic city. No long preamble here, no slow introductions, just the immediate, heavy hum of anticipation hanging in the air.
So, inside this room, you've got this restless and honestly kind of skeptical crowd of reporters and scientists just milling about. They're waiting impatiently by these hidden speakers and a massive, dramatic burgundy curtain. You know, the kind you'd see draped right across a classic theater stage. And they've all gathered in this one room for exactly one man, the eccentric inventor, Professor C. Sidwick Olms.
Suddenly, this massive, booming voice echoes from the hidden speakers, yelling, "Prepare yourselves for the salvation of the future." And then, get this, the professor literally descends from the ceiling. He is riding a personal hover drone like it's a skateboard, and he's wearing this thick, magnificent black robe that's just billowing all around him as he drops right into the middle of the room. He casually steps off his drone onto the scuffed floor, and he immediately commands the entire room's attention. He doesn't miss a beat before addressing the absolutely massive crisis of Earth's overpopulation. He starts walking the audience through his incredibly strict, unyielding logic. Colonizing the polar ice caps? Well, he dismisses that immediately, says it's way too cold, messy, and totally fruitless. What about Mars? He points out that Mars colonies are literally decades away from being ready to sustain life. So, with the very next generation facing a planet completely depleted of food and water, he argues there's only one highly unconventional answer left to save humanity. He's pacing back and forth in these flowing robes, and he passionately declares, "Time is a rushing river, and I have plunged my hands into the waters and pulled out a gleaming salmon of truth." At this point, an older, thoroughly confused scientist actually raises a hand to ask if it is in fact a literal fish. The professor just stops dead in his tracks and sharply replies, "It's a metaphor." Without losing his momentum, he steps right up to that heavy burgundy stage curtain. He grabs the thick velvet fabric with this massive theatrical flourish, completely ready to unveil his life's ultimate work. With a really sharp tug, the velvety waves of the curtain crash to the floor. And what's sitting there is this incredibly tall structure made entirely of swirling, gleaming metal. Right in the very center is a slanted archway, neatly cut out to show absolutely nothing but the blank laboratory wall right behind it. He leans right into a journalist's microphone to formally introduce the Professor C. Sidwick Olms time door. And, by the way, he is very careful to emphasize that the name must be fully capitalized. Strutting back and forth, he insists to the crowd that this operates by an infinite mathematical series. It is a strictly one-way portal, and he is adamant that it is absolutely not a fantasy time machine. Time machines, he sharply tells them, are just a wild fancy. You can feel the tension in the room spike. Eager reporters instantly thrust their microphones forward. They are all clamoring over each other to ask the exact same question. Where in the past does this humanity-saving door actually lead? With a metaphorical snap of his fingers, he drops the revelation. Texas, 1957. He smiles and explains that the sprawling giant of the American Southwest has more than enough open land to easily absorb all of Earth's modern overflow. Now, a quiet scientist in the back raises a totally valid concern about damaging the timeline. But the professor, he just quickly brushes off the ethical issues. He points to his foolproof design, noting it operates in one direction only. The 1957 timeline simply cannot enter 2072, which means their present timeline remains completely safe. And any disruptions to the folks back in 1957, he literally waves his hand and says, "That's their own problem." Completely ignoring the escalating shouts from the scientists that this whole experiment is incredibly reckless, the professor immediately spins around and moves toward the metallic wall to turn the thing on. He presses this hidden panel on the side of the metal structure. Instantly, a low hum of energy fills the room as that empty doorway begins to angrily crackle and spit light. Then, with a resounding, violent sizzle, a puddle of what looks exactly like liquid electricity fills the arched space. It stabilizes into this calm pool that ripples, kind of like water catching a breeze. Right in front of this high-tech, swirling metal portal, the professor suddenly throws off his thick black robe. Underneath, he reveals his chosen disguise for the past. Bright wool chaps, a super-wide studded belt with an immense buckle, high-polished silver-trimmed boots, a checkered shirt, and a blazing red bandana.
He places a tall 10-gallon hat on his head at this deeply cocky angle, while camera flashes absolutely erupt around him. He bows from the waist and shouts out his highly inaccurate farewell to the room. Sayonara, hombres.
He takes a single, highly dramatic step forward right into that strange and shimmering portal. And he doesn't disappear. Complete silence hangs in the air. The professor just stands there, blinking. Slowly, he falls to his knees, leaning back against the mottled metal of the wall. He buries his head in his trembling hands and begins to loudly moan about his utter failure, crying out that the door was a total botch.
The energy in the room totally deflates. The reporters and scientists, some chuckling at the sheer spectacle of it, others just shaking their heads in confusion, slowly begin to file out of the laboratory. But then, suddenly, the defeated professor aggressively snaps his head up and yells a frantic warning. There's this slow rumbling. It's muted with distance, but it is coming directly from the swirling surface of the time door. Faint yips and whoopings impossibly start to grow louder, rapidly swelling into the sound of 1,000 beating drums and a violently rolling sea of thunder.
Right as the terrified, shrieking photographers scramble for the laboratory stairs, the professor comes to a frantic, horrifying realization. He shouts over the deafening noise, "It works after all! Oh, I've just installed it backwards!"
3,000. Just let that massive, unbelievable number sink in for a second. 3,000 is the number of moving bodies pouring out of that liquid electricity right at that exact moment.
It is complete chaotic destruction. A massive herd of 3,000 rampaging Texas bulls stampedes backward through time, charging directly into the 2072 laboratory. They violently smash apart the time door, utterly destroy the scuffed lab, and very nearly trample Professor C. Sidwick Olms straight into the floor in the process.
So, that massive stampede of livestock permanently smashed the portal to pieces. It guaranteed that Professor C. Sidwick Olms' creation would be both the very first and the very last time door to ever be invented, leaving us with only one real question to think about. What else might have come through?